Hello everybody, welcome to my oil painting class. And today we are looking at a beautiful summary landscape of the gorgeous fields. We've got a river coming in. So we're looking at today how we can paint using greens, and most importantly, how can we paint, identify perspective within a landscape. So we've got some larger shapes, some medium-sized shapes, and smaller ones. And also, I'd love us to have a little focus on the composition as well. So we have a few leading directions from our trees and the river and the fields and how it brings everything together. So I'd love us to have a look at that. And on my palette, I have a number of colors out already. I have some white, cadmium yellow, ochre, olive green. My olive green is quite a yellowish type of green. Emerald green, or variety of other colors. You could use vermilion or phthalo green or Windsor green, the kind of similar emerald color. Have cobalt blue, or you can also cerulean blue. Sorry, I've got cerulean blue, but you can also have cobalt blue, just maybe with a little bit of extra white. Ultramarine and violet. So I have decided to use an orangey background. It could be slightly lighter, it could be slightly darker. Mine ended up a bit more darker, on the darker side. I quite like using this color for greens and summery colors, because leaving a little bit of orange in between the greens gives us very warm, beautiful sunshine effect atmosphere when we're painting on top. Right, because I want us to pay a little bit of attention to perspective and composition. I've got a piece of paper where I'd like to do a little bit of planning of my painting. Now, the photograph is has quite a fantastic composition already. I already trimmed my initial image. So what I have here, so I've got a square. So I quite like using very small designs, planning the image. Now you'd say, what do I need to do there? Everything is already in place. But identifying maybe the directions I mentioned earlier, the sizes of the elements will be very, very important. So for example, halfway through my image, just maybe not quite straight, but maybe a little diagonal, and all foreground objects need to fit in kind of into all of this area, which makes me subdivide the top part probably for the sky and the top of the painting. That already gives me a large segment, a medium segment, and a small segment, which is quite a nice proportion of excuse me, for the layout. So they're not too equal. So one is slightly bigger at the bottom. Right, if I were to plan some of my directions even more and plan how the viewer's eye will be following my composition, I have an entry point somewhere here going through the direction of the bushes and the river, kind of through some of the shadows. So all kind of comes in here. And I wanted to follow perhaps the river around this bend. So a group of trees here will be stopping me going out from the picture. Yeah, so they're stopping me going completely out. That's why the river is stopping here a bit more. So maybe I'll focus on those stopping points. Okay. So those are directions here. And then there is a row of small trees continuing us following through. And then the bigger, well, kind of medium-sized trees almost bringing us back here. So what I have here, if I'll just simplify it, entry point here and staying here. Okay, so I've got a spiral within the composition. So it means that within that focal point of those trees, somewhere here, I need to put the main details so that my eye will stay there once I've quickly followed through the image. So that's the plan. Again, the larger trees at the side kind of bounce me back, push me back, so I'm not coming out from the picture. I'm staying within this area. So the calm shapes of the hills at the back and the calm sky again doesn't take me elsewhere, just more brings it back together. And again, the little clouds directions perhaps again will bring that spiral, will continue that spiral going further in. I'll just do more of an arrow here like that. Yeah, so that was a kind of my thinking plan. Right, perspectives wise, so if we have our trees, that's a very, very simplified plan. So if I'm thinking of the widths of the kind of the larger shapes of the trees, bushes right in front of me here, but they're quite big, so they're almost taking half of the piece here. Then the middle ground, my trees are going to be much smaller, so that's kind of a scale of the trees, of the bushes at the front. So somewhere halfway through, they're much smaller. And then further back on the distance, there will be woodlands, there will be kind of edge of the woodlands there. There will be some more individual trees. So what scale they're going to be there? Yeah, maybe something there, maybe going tiny bit more into the line. So planning how far they're going to be within my landscape and sizing them up, that will be very important. Now, also for the perspective, I need to think about not just the size. So this is my size, let's say, of trees, but also it will be the light. So the number 2 will be the light and brightness of colors. Right. Of colors. So further away, I need to make sure, even if I'm seeing the trees very dark on the photograph, I need to make sure that the darkness on the foreground trees will be the most strong. And even the middle ground, that darkness needs to be slightly lighter. And the trees far, far back will be even lighter. Even if no photograph I were to pick up with, it's very, very similar. Again, visually, we need to plan it so the picture is not getting reversed. So those things we're just bearing in mind as we'll start painting. Right, so let's put this sketch aside. I'll send you an image of that for your reference. And let's sketch our composition now with a brush and paint straight away on our board. And then we'll do a little bit of color mixing as we start applying the colors to the board or whatever surface you've got. So I'm going to plan my layout using a little bit of running. So I have a pot with some oils where I mix 3 ingredients in there, and I've got a pot with just some turps. So if I need to wash my brush, I just use the turps. If I'm using my oils, that's mainly for the painting. So because I want my drawing to be a little bit more drier, not being easily to be washed off, so I'm just going to use some turps to produce a drawing. So I'm going to go for a bit of white, and I'm going to go for a dab of ochre and some violet. Now my paint is going to be reasonably runny, so I can sketch with it. Okay, maybe a tiny bit more darker, so just in case if it will start slightly dark or slightly lighter, whichever you prefer. As long as we can see it. It might reflect on my surface a little bit earlier on, as my camera picks all sorts of shiny effects, but it will settle after all. Right, so we planned that if I find halfway through my square, so my main design is going to have that diagonal somewhere at the front. Okay, so I'm going to sketch my, that's probably the low, is it the lower part of the river? Let's do the higher part of the river, and let's find the lower part of the river. Maybe it will be a little bit lower, so I've done something in between. If I need to remove anything, I can just put a little bit of tabs on my tissue and just wash it off. Okay, so I'm planning big shapes and not going to work into too many details too earlier on, so I can adjust things. Have quite a nice, beautiful corner of green right in front of us on the top left corner, sorry, bottom left corner. And this bush stands, or hedge stands up. Tiny bit more paint as I'm running out already. Okay. So that's gonna come up somewhere here alongside of them. A little bit of the open view for the river. Again, I'm not doing any details on the river yet. I want to identify. So if we coming into the composition here, okay, there's the river stops. Well, the bank is turning. So let's turn that space now. And let's place some of these trees. How far they're going to be standing here as a wall to keep our composition together. Let's plan that path of the trees, how it's going to flow. Okay, maybe up the hill there. Again, not overly focusing. This is exactly how it is. I want to balance it by placing most of the elements first, identifying how much of the sky I need, how big the trees are going to be before finalize it and tweak it. So let's find maybe the skyline. If we need to plan it and adjust it to our compositional kind of idea. So if we need to make some of the hills higher to keep the shapes to be viewed much easier. So that will be a good idea to adjust things. I like the idea of the clouds coming in this direction. Very small ones, but it will be enough. Then let's have a look at our trees. It's almost in the center. I just put it just down a bit off the center, this key tree. Again, using oak and violet with a bit of white as a sketching color, it will be a good colors to see behind our greens. So they're not going to be interrupting too much. Has some nice shadows there as well. Again, we'll come back to that. But am I happy with kind of that volume of the trees? There's nice light, a little gap. There's another group of trees somewhere here. Okay. Let's check how everything is working. Okay, we're coming in here. We've got this darkness of the river. We've got the darkness of the trees. I can combine, I can put a little edge of a larger tree, standing up tree somewhere here. That's again will be quite nice. And there is a gap within the bank. The bank splits, so I'm slowly going now into the details. The reason I'm interested into that bank is where it's going to be more in kind of central, or shall we just break it down into another sub-island? So that gives us a little bit more variety. I think there are some leaves there which covers it up. So if we need to make our own decision of how the river is going to break that bank, I think that's would be good. There's some shadows in a darker bank under the trees. I'm going to keep it as it is. Quite like a little, tiny little tree on the side next to the darker bank. I think that's quite nice, almost like a conversation going, as well as the medium-sized trees. Well, they're quite smallish at the bank at the back. One tree here. Now, if we were to color them in, as I'm doing now, it will be a little bit harder for us to paint over them. So if you just keep them as outlines, I'm just realizing that it's reflecting for you quite a bit. Right, let me pick up my board. Right, so that's less reflecting now. And let's just double check on anything I need to have at the back. Maybe a little bit more definition for some of them. Maybe to add a little more shape of a field at the back. If you're getting a little lost within your lines at the back, it's quite small, everything's quite small at the back. Don't worry, but by the time we start adding colors, light and darker tones, it will be easier for you to recognize the woodlands and which area is going to be our mountains. So just be with me and we'll get back to that. So overall, I'm happy that my lines are going that way and this way, and then visually with color, they will be bringing things here, and I'll pick up some nice shadows here to continue that kind of those lines coming in and maybe staying somewhere here. Okay, I'm happy there. Right, so the drawing's finished. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to finish your design, and we'll start getting the colors out. Right, let's now pick up some brushes and paints and let's mix some colors. Now I'm going to start from some of the blues. So I have a range of filbert brushes, so they're flat, round edged brushes. Quite like working with them. We've got loads of roundy edges on a tree, so I think that's one of my preferences for this range of brushes. I'm going to go for a larger one first, and I also have a spare piece of paper where I'm going to put some of the testing colors as well. I just want to see that range. So starting from the blues, that's what I'd like to go from first. We've got some lovely paler blues in the sky and some beautiful deeper blues in the water, in the reflection. Although within its shape, the sky and the water will have slightly lighter, slightly darker tones. So this time I'm going to dip my brush into my oils. And I'm going to load it with a little bit of white and cerulean blue. So if I'll have a lighter version of it, I can put a little sample here. And I could have a slightly darker version of it. So very small changes. Sometimes it only takes a drop more paint to make the color much, much darker. Okay, so the gentle changes of tone, that's what we want to see in a painting. We don't want it to go very light and very dark very quickly. So if I'm painting the sky, I might use kind of those three tones of cerulean blue. If you don't have cerulean, any other blues, maybe not ultramarine, but any other phthalo blue or Windsor blue or anything else of a similar kind would be great. Now I'm going to make a tiny bit more darker color just to see if that sky is going to be, or maybe that might be more reflection of the sky. Let's see if that's, so again, it's not huge jump, but we can definitely see the difference. If you're mixing it and doing a little exercise on your own, you can do as many subtones, going light and going darker. That's a really good warm-up exercise for us. Now for the water reflection, I want to see a little bit more depth. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add now a dab of ultramarine, maybe a tiny bit more, to my paint mixture, just to see the extra depth. Now ultramarine will make my blue a little bit more violet-y. It will get more into the violet side of things, when the cerulean blue looks much more a little bit closer to emerald green. So again, I'm just making it a tiny bit more darker. So I haven't washed my brush, so there is a bit of cerulean going on my color. So it's a bit of mixture there. As I'm getting more of the ultramarine, and the white is still present there, I'm gonna add a tiny bit more again cerulean, so it's not just ultramarine. Okay, so again, a slightly more solid color. And let's get maybe as dark as we want to go. Okay. Oops. If I were to dilute, well, if I were to mix my ultramarine with white and there isn't much cerulean in it, it will have a different type of lighter blue. And again, maybe for some of the clouds reflections in the water, a more lively turquoise cerulean will be very different from a whitish ultramarine. Okay, and I think I'm ready to do my sky. So I'm just going to wipe my brush from ultramarine. So I'm not going to wash it, I'm just wiping it enough. If you wanted to dip it in a little bit of dabs and just again, just give it a wipe, that will be enough. And I'll use this brush again, loading, getting a bit more oil. It's not overly runny. I want to have more just a soft paint on the brush, but not runny, but at the same time not overly chunky. So that's just a bit of oil with white and some cerulean blue. Okay, so I want my lighter version perhaps first. And I'll work at the silhouette of the mountains. Now, against my very dark orangey background, I can see the color I'm going to get. But against everything's quite dark, it appears very, very light, almost whitish. But I know on my palette it's not, so I just need to persevere and work, kind of trust that those colors will come back and spring back when the other colors are applied. So I'm planning roughly, maybe a little bit further into my hills. I'm applying this line. I can always paint over it if I need more precise silhouette. I'm working into a larger shape so I can blend my darker tones from above. And then I'm going to get more cerulean. I can start blending it into my earlier layer. I tend not to paint plain areas, let's say the sky, as even color as painting the fence. I tend to go with the strokes one way, then slightly another way. Perhaps, remember we're talking about the direction of very light clouds. So some of the strokes will go this way, but they might be going, even smaller strokes, just supporting them, kind of balancing. Might just go the opposite direction a little bit. They will be all together, creating that organic environment. Now, if you can see a little bit of your orange background, some of the strokes a little transparent, that's fantastic as well. So don't worry if it doesn't cover it perfectly. That's exactly why we have the orangey background. So I don't want my sky to be too even, from the higher points. So the higher we go from the horizon, the darker the sky is going to be. Not bringing overly too much color to the background at the moment. If you overdone it and it's become too dark, just bring a little bit of extra light with some extra white. What I'm going to do next is to use a little bit more fresh white on my brush and bring a couple of clouds. I just want them to be a little bit lost. So if it's a fresh white, I'm just applying it in the direction of that diagonal. But as I'm working into it, kind of the same stroke, just repeating it, it blends it and brings it, kind of it settles into the wet strokes of the sky. Maybe there's another one somewhere there. If you don't like it for whatever reason, take some of the thick paint off, just kind of smudge it and bring a fresh color over. Lost a little bit of depth here, so let's just bring a little bit more. Okay. So mainly tones here, mainly tones. If I wanted to make more variety of color there, I could use a stroke of ultramarine as what we mixed earlier. So a dab of ultramarine with my cerulean. So if I come back, let's say, to the darker cerulean, version and a dab of ultramarine. Not huge, otherwise it's going to be very bold jump. I might just, in my dark areas, just put an extra stroke here and there. That's a little extra, just gives it a bit of a depth. Again, don't want to be looking overwhelmed with the volume of darkness. And if I want to, I went from my blues a little bit more into the violet, and I can also go tiny bit more into the green. So that's my range of blues. So if I were to use my cerulean, again, a lighter version of it, and I have a small dab of emerald green, very small. You might not even see as much on my screen. I think my camera is not picking it up much as a green. Just a little bit more as a gentle turquoise. So if I'll put it here as my sample again. It just appears quite light, but it's more of green, turquoisey tone, and I can add it to my lighter layers as a stroke or two. It might be enough. Don't overdo it. But keeping them. If you would have just painted the sky in cerulean, that would have been plenty as well for our first session today for this term. But a little advance is getting slightly more extra color. Now I start having a little bit of cluster of similar size strokes, so I'm going to make sure that they vary here. Okay. I'm happy with that. Right, now let's have a look at the water reflections, at the water kind of reflecting the sky. So as I said, we need to start using now darker tones from the ultramarine. And also we're probably going to have a dab of violet with it. So let's start with the ultramarine, lighter, darker, and then I will come to the violet. So I'm still going for some white. I always use white as a base for my colors. Let's have some ultramarine. We can still have a little bit of cobalt blue or cerulean. As for some of the lighter tones of the water. Okay, so that's a lighter version of the water. And where it's going to be again, so if the sky is the lightest close to the horizon, so the same, the water, it's a reverse image. So the darker tones in the water will be coming towards us, and towards the horizon, it's going to be lighter, just upside down. So that's going to be my lighter blues there. And I haven't got a shape of the tree here. If I were to put it as a lovely reflection, so I'm just going to quickly add a shape. So I'll bear in mind my, okay, that's this tree. Let's do it a bit more like that. And the tree is going to be right. Reflection is going to be somewhere there. So let me remove. So I'm planning and sketching planning now the shapes and amending my details as I'm adding my colors. So that's where my tweaking is going to happen. So that's going to be my tree. That's giving me a little bit more opportunity to paint the water. I'll shrink the size of the tree reflecting in the water because it will be easier for me to paint over it. Didn't want to all kind of lose it all together, but I wanted for it to be present partially. Right, I can see a little bit of white cloud in the water, so I'll use the same color, and then I'm going to go darker. So my ultramarine is going to start to increase in darkness. Okay. And again, I'm trying to paint the strokes kind of varying directions. So they're not all the same and super even. They're more reflecting them, well, kind of the more suggesting the direction of the clouds formation reflecting in the water. And further down, I think maybe a little bit of light somewhere. Lightish tone of ultramarine somewhere here. But then there's quite a lot of very dark tone of the water. And I'm going to use dab of violet with my paint. And again, if I put it next to my blues here. So that's becoming not just darker more, but more into the violet side. And I'll bring it into the painting. That's quite dark. Might just need to blend it slightly better. But perhaps just putting it there first and just deciding on the overall darkness of those corners of the river first. I tend to paint a little bit lower my color, kind of going over the trees, going over the objects, let's say the bank of the river, because I haven't defined the silhouette of those objects yet. And I'm going to use a little bit of emerald green with violet for some very dark, deeper water reflections of the trees. Now it can look black-like, so if I were to use a dab of white, it will appear dark, but it's not going to be black-like. So that little gap will be almost just all dark. So emerald green and violet together. Okay. Now, if I'll block it in first, and then I can blend it afterwards. So those are my overall darker tones for the river. That will also include the shadow of the, well, reflection of the tree here. I need a little bit more sharper color. Now the reflection of the tree, it doesn't need to have any blending. So if it starts smudging too much, we can put fresher whites around it. Okay, I'm happy with that. Now let's tweak the blues. Right, I should have put this color somewhere here as well. So those are our ranges of blues for the sky and for the water reflection. So let's wipe my brush on the tissue and load it with some more lighter tones so I can work with actually just a tiny bit more darker here as well. Let's just get it all the way to the tree. It's reflected for me to see. I want to keep these darker tones a little bit more even. Okay, let's come back now for the ultramarine. If your paint is too dry, just keep using a drop of oil mixture so the strokes flow a little bit easier. Okay, so let's blend this one now. Okay. And I'm going to keep loading fresh color. I want to keep it clean. I want to keep it not mucky. With oil paints, if we're overworking, if we're working over another layer, let's say I'm touching up the silhouette of the tree reflection here. If I press too much with my brush, I'm gonna almost like smudge the darker layer, but I'm applying a lighter tone to fix the silhouette. So I need to be extra careful to press with the brush lightly. There were a little bit of glimpses of clouds somewhere here. And a little bit more somewhere here as well. And the rest I just need to make sure blend it. Blend it a little bit more gently. And that's what oil paints are really good at, blending, because they stay wet for long enough for us to play. Okay. Just do something a little bit different here. Tiny bit of light. If it's a little bit too much when I start applying other tones around, I'll come back to that. Right, I think I'm happy with that. Let's keep it fresh, not overworked. And let's move on to our other colors. Right, now let's have a look at the lighter tones. So we have looked at the lighter sky. We have got some of the shadows in the water reflection, but I'd love us to look at the most light tones for the shallow ends of the river banks and some of the hills as well, perhaps even a couple of strokes for our mountains, hills. So again, I have, I'm going to pick up a different brush so it's a clean one. So let's just mix a couple of colors for that. So I'll use always my white first. And I'm going to use a dab of ochre. Now that's quite a light tone, but I think I could change it as well from a yellowish. Let's just make it a little bit more concentrated to see its strength. But I can also make it even more exciting by using a dab of violet with that. It becomes a little bit more neutralized, so it's not as fresh, but it's become a little close to violet. I don't know if you can see it much on the screen, that difference, but it's immediately softened that boldness of the yellow in ochre. Okay. And if I wanted to do something similar for the shadows, I can just add more violet. So while we've got this color on our brushes, let's place it. Just going to mix a little bit more of it. Let's place it in our bank of the river. Okay, so that will be all of that area. And again, on the screen, it will start appearing quite whitish. But it has got lovely warmth to it. So I'm just doing the bulk of that area. Now it's more flat than the sky, but there are slight changes in the color and the darkness of that bank. But if I were just to block it in first as a simplified shape, ignoring the shadows, ignoring everything else, just a rough block there. And I have another block for this area as well. I'm trying not to smudge my blues when I start adding other colors to these two areas. Oops, that smudged it. That's what happens when you come too close to them darker tones. So when we do that, just be careful. I'll load fresh color. Repaint the smudge. Okay, so they're not perfect in shapes, but they're as big blocks are there. And I also need that little island somewhere there. If I'm going over dark, already painted area, I will end up with a bit of paint on my brush here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just wipe it off. And instead of kind of going backwards into this area, I'll load more paint and almost just place it there and leave it instead of rubbing it in like I was doing it for the sky or for the reflections when I wanted to blend. I want these ones to stay more independent strokes. Okay. Now, let's make part of them, that bank a little lighter. So I'm going to have more white and perhaps a little dab more of violet. So then it's not just going to look lighter, but also a tiny bit more into that violet. I haven't mixed that color earlier, so it almost looks again white, but hardly you can see it as a difference. But that powerful, I'm running out of it already, but that powerful light with a dab of violet in it over the area we just applied, that those two colors will mix, the pale lightish ochre and this new one, that's the same, good, will mix, and that's what will be good together. So I'm going to use the edge of my bank here. Okay, I'm almost touching it gently, so I'm not smudging the water as much. If at any point I'll smudge the water, I'll just try to stay with thicker strokes, sort of pressing too much, but mainly touching the surface. And again, I can wipe the mucky edge of the brush if that happens. Okay. That thicker layer of paint allows me to be more spontaneous. I can smudge it and work a little bit easier into the yellow, but for the water edge, so it mainly stays there and maybe disappears further. Just make it a tiny bit more flatter, and it just disappears. And maybe similar, a little line. I think it's maybe how the sediment spreads on the river. Just a little bit of that light. So we can see one area is a bit more flat on the bank, and one a little bit more exposed. Again, something perhaps wider here. And it's not continuous, it's not goes as an outline. It just starts and stops. Wider line, narrower line. Might do another top of the bank here. Okay, I'm smudging into the color of the water. So let's bring a little bit more thicker paint. So my strategy is to get thicker paint to cover that smudge. Okay. And then immediately wipe it on my tissue. So if there is any muddy, mucky color. Okay, that's good. And still a little bit of freshness of that color here. Now you're in charge of your painting, so if the smudging and applying lighter, darker tones, kind of smudging in the process becomes too complicated, becomes too muddy, you can just remove the paint, paint lighter tones first, and then work with the darker tones over. That's an easier strategy. But because we're working into the blues, I've decided to work into our darker tones here first. Now there are tiny little rapids, so I might just put some of the smudgy lines in the water, so that gives me an idea of the water going over some of the stones. And also imperfection of the borders, that's kind of takes the edge off. Doesn't need to be super perfect here. Okay, I'm good with that. And also, I don't want to have all our borders to be perfect, perfectly sharp. So, for example, the closer island, if I were to just wipe my brush, it stays still within the same light color, but it's very, very dry. I just want to gently interact that border and create a little bit less sharp. I just keep cleaning it, just have a more softer edge for it. There might be pebbles reflecting, or maybe more going further into the edge of the water, so just not as perfectly sharp. Okay, so we've done our almost like a medium tone for the sandy banks. We've done the lights, and let's do some shadows. So that will be the same color combination of white, ochre, and violet. But now the violet will stay much stronger. Now I'm not using as much oil. I'm using quite a lot of thick paint. So then I have more control of placements for these areas as well. So this is my violet and ochre together. And depends on the proportion of the two colors in white you'll have. You can have a darker version, you have more yellowy version, you can have more violety version. That will be all good as well. Don't go super dark. So if I'll put more violet, It's going to be a bit too much. So again, for comparison reasons, that might be a little bit too strong. Perhaps some might be quite okay. If I'll put a stroke here, I think I might get away with it. But I think a lighter version of it with less violet and kind of more of an even ochre proportion will be good. One thing, because we're applying the color to already wet surface, already light wet surface of oils, going darker color might be actually a good thing, because in a way it will create a lighter tone. So if I'll go close to the trees, painting the shadows much more darker tone, which is good anyhow, and then stick to the same color or slightly lighter. But if we were to go over our much lighter ochre here and let it smudge, so that will be the exact tones we want. I'm going to use some repetitive strokes so it will smudge even better here. Okay, and more smudging, so I'm going slightly different directions gently. So I don't want to have stripes. I think I might extend this shadow a little more. If I overdone certain shadows, I can always come back with a lighter ochre and fix things. But I think that darker color, maybe an edge of my island, will be quite a good color as well. Showing a different type of stones, maybe they are pebbles, so it's not as perfect. There are also, again, this is very small nuances, but there are also a couple of shallow ends, or maybe there's some water lilies or some other plants growing on the surface of the water. So I think, and that helps with my direction of them, of compositional direction. So I might just put a few of the same ochre and violet tones, just a few strokes to give me an idea. And if it will be too much, I can always get rid of that. If you're not sure, leave it out. Okay. Could do with a lighter stroke for my ochre. Just to tidy the shadow, so it's not as wide, or it goes a little bit more further in. Just shows the breaking of the foliage between the trees with the light. Okay, that's much more natural. Got another shadow for the edge of the bank somewhere here, but we could have come back to it once we've done all the greens. I'll just do it over, and then could do with tiny bit of a light behind it, but again, it's too much details because I haven't done any greens, so in a way that's could have been left for later. Right, and now let's get to our greens. So the lighter tones we used with ochre going to be a tiny bit more darker for our fields at the back. I'm just going to top up my white. So I'm gonna have some white, and I'm gonna load my brush with a little more olive green. Now my olive green is quite yellowish, so if your olive green is a dull color, just add some cadmium yellow to it. I might still do that with mine as well. Okay, so if I put it next to my ochre and white, I can see that's a darker color, and I think that will work quite nicely for my fields at the back. I think with extra yellow, it will make it beautiful as well. Just a darker version of it slightly here. Right, and I'm just gonna go very boldly and fill in the spaces for the field behind my trees here. I'll shrink my trees or even get rid of the small trees because it will be way easier to apply a new shape for them rather than just to paint around it. So again, I'm blocking the spaces. I might even put a few more behind the trees here and behind the tree silhouettes. I'm blocking it overall area first, and then we'll apply our perspective rules in color. Okay, that's going to be a good gap somewhere here between my trees. I'm making the gaps between the trees deliberately bigger, so it gives me flexibility to paint the foliage afterwards. Okay. There is another little gap, but a little darker perhaps. A little bit of the field there. Now, if I were to go just for my olive green, which is quite yellowish, so it stays darker, but it has that gorgeous quality of the green as well, very sunny green. I can then do the field of the behind the trees here on the left-hand side. So in your case, you might just go for darker version with extra green in it, or perhaps even a dab of ochre in it. So then the yellow doesn't make it too light. Okay, I'm just gonna put a nice darker tone behind. So then the key field is staying in front of us and it's kind of keeping that attention. Our eyes are attracted to this area rather than taking it to the field further away. Okay. However, our front field could still have some of that color, maybe a little bit more at the back. So if I were to blend it together, my existing colors, so it's just have the hint of that color. Just a hint to separate it, but at the same time to show that distance. And perhaps a little more at the front, although we will change that color a tiny bit more. As it comes to the water, close to the water, it's probably get more moisture and the grass is staying a little bit more lush. So I'm going to add a dab of emerald green to this paint mixture, and it becomes much more stronger, lusher green here. Very small amount emerald green or any versions of it, no matter what it's called, become very powerful in color and sometimes a bit too strong. So small quantities of it is used at a time is better. So I'm changing that to that bank, and what might be behind, maybe under the trees as well. They've got more shadows, and the water is more preserved into those areas for the grasses. Just feels something different. Or maybe there was a specific crop which was this area was not planted and the other crop been already harvested. Something is different. Okay. And while we're on the similar greens, we can see some light of the greens on the foreground for the hedge right in the bottom corner, and a little bit of light on some of the trees, kind of middle ground. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to increase the darkness of this green. So emerald green. Now that green becomes too strong, too fluorescent for anything on the painting. So I'm going to tone it down with some ochre. So that's less jumpy type of green. Okay, so it almost becomes very similar. I think not dark enough for me yet. A little bit similar to darker version of my olive green, but olive green doesn't go any darker, just at its maximum darkness was somewhere here. So lighter version of Hooker's green is going to be good. Okay, somewhere there. So I can block this area before I get with any darker tones. Just fill it in. I'm looking for some of the directions of the branches for the hedge, perhaps some of the leaves. If you were to leave some of the gaps, preserving some of the background color, that's fine. If most of it's gone, that's fine as well, because we can do a little bit of scratching there as well, just to see dabs of color. And I also want to put a little bit of the same color on the tree here and on the tree sides here, before we go for any darker tones there as well. Now, a little of that color can come to the hedge, the second hedge, but just be careful, it's going to be much darker, not too much, or perhaps just more of a smudged color. So that's going to be much darker tone altogether. Right, I'm ready now to work with my last lighter tones of the hills. Now, having them still dark as part of my background, I quite like the silhouette of it. So I might consider starting with a not as light tone as it is on my photograph. I might give myself an opportunity to make that final decision. So I'm going to make it slightly darker. So again, my starting color is going to be white. And I'm going to go for a dab of ochre and violet, almost as what we were doing for the beach, because I can see some lovely shadows, violet shadows on the hills. But if I'll use it a little bit more diluted, I'll just take some extra, let me just test it out here. But if I'll have it more diluted, so I'll wipe my brush, so it's still loaded with the color, but it hasn't got it as thick. If it's diluted, it means that I will be able to see the color behind. And as I have an orangey background, my hills will have that orangey red color still present. And if it will be too much, I can go for more solid color and remove part of that. So just applying it. It will settle in and will be a tiny bit more darker. Or alternatively, you can just take a tiny bit of that layer off with your brush. I think that will be enough. So it's light, but it's not overly light. And I quite like the hint of blue or violet of the hills at the back. So I think I might just go for a dab of ultramarine. Let's see if that's going to be too. No, I think that will be okay, because it's going to have very dark trees next to it. So I think that will be quite a good tone. And gently going to go over my pale ochre and violet. Give me almost again, perhaps a shadow from the clouds. Excuse me. Perhaps more exposed rock. There's something a little bit more different there. Smaller brush might be easier for you to work with, so it's not too smudgy. I think that's quite a nice ultramarine support here as well. Now I'll bring a little bit more stronger ochre, let's say maybe more in the valley. Again, those are little nuances. You can have your own versions of this, how much of the light or darkness you might want to have. But the variety that you have, subtones, so there's not huge jumps in darkness, let's say, as it is on the front here. There is a very gentle change of what's a little bit dark, what's a little bit light. It's there, but it's not huge. Okay, I'm happy with that. And I'm now ready for working into the trees. Now I'm going to swap the brush to a smaller one, so then I can work into the shapes of the trees. I think I'm going to work with some of the larger, darker tones on a kind of on the middle ground, or where my focal point is, to give me that introduction into the trees. Then I can compare it to the trees in the front and the trees at the back. So let's now have some emerald green. Now, on its own, it's too strong and too powerful, and it's quite often too fluorescent. Dab of white with it just to make it lighter, but I do want it mixed with ultramarine, so it will remain slightly into the cool side, but I don't want it to be just cool, so my ochre is going to be there as well. So I'm mixing all sorts of colors with this. Emerald green, ultramarine, bit of ochre. Now, it's not my final color, but it is probably the darkest green we've got so far. So I'm going to just place it for my tree right here. I'm using small dabs, almost those round edge strokes. I can work with extra darker tones here, but initially I'm going to have to kind of think of a shape of the tree and get overall its body kind of placed. Perhaps preserving extra lighter tones than needs to. Okay, I should have placed that color here. So that's my trees. Tree next to that, slightly changing in color. So I'm adding a dab more yellow in it. Again, just thinking of its overall body and mass as it's going to appear in my piece. They're not final. I'm not looking at the shadows behind them. This is kind of not full darkness, but we are building that darkness overall here. Let's see that silhouette a bit more. Okay. And perhaps for this tree, which will be reflecting in the water. Okay. And I'm gonna go for a dab of violet now. Actually, that was a big dab, but I think that's okay. And that's going to be my really good dark tones on my trees here. Again, as I'm working on top of a lighter tone, they blend immediately and they belong to the surface at the same time. A little bit less on this tree. I'm more trying to squint my eyes and step away as I'm doing these strokes, rather than being too precise. Trying to see it as a group of shapes. I think some of my strokes reflect quite a lot as well, but that's okay. So that's given me an idea of some of the darkness there. I'll go for stronger ultramarine and just violet. It will come out very dark and I can make some of my shadows out of that from the trees on the banks. Just want to have the nice strengths of the depths here before going any further, even if they will be still a little awkward in not final. But let's just identify some of the key darknesses. That's better. Maybe another darkness will come in between the trees. There's another dark shadow will be coming up to the tree here in the corner. Quite like that extra darkness. I might place it on my key tree. Okay, I've lost some light behind it, but that's something for the nuances. Now there's quite a lot of paint now on these greens, so my placements of strokes, I'm almost like wiping the paint and almost like leaving it there rather than trying to blend it or smudge it or introduce it in a different way. Let's do a little bank connection to the shadows here as well. Well, I've got similar color, or we can even do them a little bit of borders of part of the bank of the sandy beach here. Just in some places a little bit sharper, a little bit darker than others. Maybe it's gone a little bit too high. Okay, that's better. Right, so I'm happy with that. So I think I've got more confidence now to go for the trees at the back and to go for the trees at the front. So something lighter than these stones gonna come for the trees at the back, and even lighter further back. So I have my colors here already, but if I were to add a little bit of white, on its own, white will just dilute and make the colors a little bit washed down. So still a dab of yellow or ochre. We still need that sunshine. Okay, that's too light for the silhouettes of the trees. So let's make it slightly darker. I want them to stand out against our fields. That's better. So just dabs and a clean line next to the field, so we can see this is the edge of the field, and uneven tops of the trees to show varieties of heights. Okay, I'll block the rest of the orangey areas here. Without too much thinking, just blocking it in. Okay, and you can do the contrasts in a moment, but let's go a tiny bit more lighter for the field, for the trees at the back. They could be gently kind of white, as they don't have to be strong and yellow or ochre this time in comparison to these trees, because again they're further into the distance. So I'll have that hint of green present initially, and then I'll go slightly darker version, maybe slightly even blue version of green. Okay, tiny bit more contrast. It's quite a lot of thick light paint. Yeah, it's quite nice hazy feel. Here I haven't touched it up, so I can still see a bit more of a line. So let's just make it more soft. So I'm not going too much into how many individual trees or how we can see more details. I'm trying to keep them as groups. Okay. I quite like the idea of tiny bit of the stream showing there, so perhaps a little light stroke will come up later there as well for me. I ended up with a tree growing over my key tree, so I need to hide that. So I think that will need to be fixed, otherwise it's breaking my focal. point. Kind of distracts it by the background tones. Okay, that's another distant field. Okay. So a small amount of white I wanted to show with some ochre and white, ochre and dab of violet. Maybe just white and ochre will be enough. Just for a tiny little stroke I want to do somewhere for the stream, the river going. Just gonna break it down, don't want to be too big. Perhaps a little bit less than that volume. And perhaps not going up the hill, but if I were to break it down, just suggestive. If it's too small, fiddly details, perhaps just avoid it. Just keep the trees. We don't want that scale going up and distorting your composition mood. I'm going to do it a tiny bit there, and perhaps a couple of more larger trees. So if there is a bit of a stream going on, it's not taking too much attention. Okay, I'm happy with that. To keep the attention kind of all in this area, I think I can do with a little bit of sunny field, a bit more yellowy green at the front and finish off the rest. Okay, a bit more white. Just want to make that focal point stay in here. Okay, that's good. I want to bring a little bit more dabs of light under my tree again, which I've lost. Okay. Slowly getting there. That was that line I wanted there as well. A dab of light, another shore or on the light behind our tree there as well. Okay, now I can pick up tiny bit more darker tones. So I've done my trees in the distance in one tone. Let's get tiny bit of darkness to some of it. So same color, emerald green, a bit of blue, and some violet. I already have it on my palette. All I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna pick up a small amount of it and just on the side and the lower areas of the trees. I'm gonna dab on top. Now they shouldn't be as shouldn't come out as strong contrast as these trees. This is my constant comparison. This is just a little something to see the variety. So as for this area, just a very gentle pickup of varieties. Very, very gentle. However, we're mixing the earlier skies, that very, very small touch of changes. Okay, that's probably enough. It's a bit too pointy. Let's just make that shape a little bit better. And those are the type of nuances you can work through. I think that's better. Maybe something tiny bit more darker here. And my hedges for the front. I'll pick up my large brush again. And again, I'll go for emerald green. There is some white on my palette already, so I think I might, no, I think I'll need some more white because I need a little bit of body to the paint. I'm going to use the rest of my ochre. And I'm going to go for some blue and some violet. So everything goes in here. My green, my blue, my violet, a little bit of ochre. Ochre and white, small quantities will make the color not black looking. We can still see the greenness in it. We can still see the color. I'm mixing it really, really well. If I'm picking up all this variety of colors and I've got them not mixed properly, that will be a bit of a disaster. Loads of marbling effects and loads of unpleasant textures. So let's do some big strokes working into the hedge here. Let's build up a very quick shape. So the strokes comes not only from the size of my brush, but also larger kind of suggestive shapes of branches. So they're much more close to us. I'm going to have a tiny bit more violet color into this. And I want to put the tree, which is covering part of my sandy beach. I keep topping up the fresh color because sandy beach makes my strokes very, very light immediately. So if I want to build them up, kind of placements of them first, and then I can top the color, that will be good. It will be very dark. I'll add some lighter strokes, but mainly they will stay quite dark. Okay, I think that will be enough. I'll just check the size of those strokes as well. Okay, let's come back to some of the strokes of the darks on the hedge, which I'm seeing mainly the light of. So if that is area, in perspective for the next hedge, it's much wider. So I'm seeing very different spaces of shadows here. Okay. That's a little bit lighter here as well. Right, let's tiny bit come back. I can cover my whole hedge, just extending the lighter tones of the earlier color. And I want to make it too light, but by accident, if the light color comes in, it's more soft. And let's touch up in between tones, so some of the lights will come in the shadow, light strokes. So they go and smudge. Okay, and some of the light tones, sorry, some of the dark tones will go a little bit more into the light shape. And that's when you can spend more time defining some of these shapes. Sometimes overworking though makes it too much. You kind of overdevelop it. So if I do that, I'll bring some of the darker tones back and simplify the shadows. I'm just putting some direct violet which will keep things in place. Okay. I don't want to have too many sharp edges here. I can soften them and smudge them. So we're almost there. So I quite like now my hedge. I've got some smaller strokes for some individual leaves. I can see the big masses. Got some sharper borders, got some softer borders. That's all quite nice. Some sharper definitions on the trees close to us, again, gives us the opportunity to see this is really close. But at the same time, I don't want too much sharpness. I want that kind of to continue and stay there. So let's just propel the color, a little bit of light going that way on the hedge here. And let's just touch a few more things on the board, I think, for my bank. I think I can see a few things could be improved. And then we'll be stopping for today. So a little bit more light on the greens. So stops and the little evaluations are very important. Stepping away from your painting, photographing it, seeing it on a smaller scale, or looking at taking it towards the mirror and looking at it in the mirror. It will give you an idea of what might be still not quite right. So again, my next color is just small change. So they're not as huge jumps as some of the greens at the back. You know, let's say that green and that yellow on the field. Some of those contrasts are huge, yeah? Here, very, very soft. Again, different size strokes. I still have a very large brush. I'm trying to look at the directions of some of the leaves and give me that feel. Maybe still tiny bit of light, perhaps on some of the light touching the edges of the leaves, so they're just kind of shining on the sunshine surface there. Might give that a little sparkle, just a little. And again, it's that light what our eyes will be following, as well as the directions of the greens. Okay, with that, just too many similar ones, so let's just break it down a little. Okay, I'm happy with that. Right, I haven't done my tree. I've got a little tree which I left and I wanted to see. Got lots of paint here. So anything slightly darker version of green. Perhaps a little darker tone for it. And the shadow from it as well. Right, for the shadow to be seen better, I need a little extra light to support that. That's better. And I think there's some more imperfections, just looks a little plain this area, so maybe perhaps a little more imperfections of this grassy bank. And perhaps this area as well, something a little bit more variety, so it doesn't appear too flat. That's better again. So if it's a larger area and it's not looking a little bit too simple, when we need to have more kind of attraction going there, so slight range of light or dark or direction of a stroke. Okay, let's put a little extra light somewhere here. Going quite thick paint now to have that light standing against the field. Okay, that's good. Right, and also wanted to touch a bit of the bank. I think it's could shrink a little, so then the tree reflection will become slightly bigger. If I keep smudging a bit of white into my reflection, I just need to make sure I top up the darkness there as well. Okay, that's better. There's a lot of light, my strokes picking up on the camera, so there's not actually light tones, it's the thickness of the strokes, which I know if I change the angle of the painting, it would be all good. Right, and I wanted to have more fresher blue. So if I wash my brush now and get some fresh, just want to lift that bank a little bit higher. So if I'll go for white, bit of cerulean blue, cobalt blue, and ultramarine. Okay, tiny bit darker. That's a bit better, a tiny bit darker. Okay, that's better, and I need to make sure that that shoreline is consistent with my tree reflection. Okay, that's better. And any of these darker shapes, perhaps just gently shrinking it. And again, something I needed for my painting feels better. You might not need any of those. You might have ended up with a perfect shoreline and the underneath shapes of the water. But again, it's an opportunity to show how certain improvements could be made, or how you work over certain areas. Okay, that's quite good as well. Just need a little bit more fresher white for the edge. Again, I need to make sure I have a clean brush. Gonna go for some fresh white. I'm gonna go quite thick, probably even without any oil. So that's will give me more control again. And the thicker paint stays, doesn't kind of smudge, it stays on a surface. Okay, and because I don't want it as a line, I can blend top part. Yeah, that's good. And I think I could tweak a tiny bit of my shadows here. Could do with a slightly bigger, right, it's too soft edge. I want a slightly sharper edge. Not blended. Okay, just want to make that variety here. And I want to have a slightly darker shadow on the beach here as well. and perhaps something, a little body of light at the back and where the trees are. That's a bit more better as well. So those little tweaks, border maybe of part of the shore. A big stroke. A little bit too wide stroke, that's better. Sometimes you have to go with a gut feel as well. So if something you've done on your piece and I haven't, it works for you, absolutely keep it and absolutely don't fight it. Preserve it, look after it, make the best of it. Okay, that might be just imperfections in the stones there. Something just needs something right in there for me. And I think a tiny bit of light here as well. Okay, I think I'm ready to stop here. So I have my circular entrance, gentle kind of turn of the spiral, taking me and keeping me focused on my trees here. All the rest is supporting it all. I'm happy with the perspective showing from larger strokes to medium ones to small, becoming more of a pattern ones. Yeah, my clouds supporting, keeping everything together. So could tweak a few more other elements, but overall I'm happy with the painting and I look forward to seeing your pieces finished as well. Thank you very much for today. I look forward to seeing you in future sessions. Thank you.